A mountain man was still a virgin at 35, until a homeless 18-year-old asked to stay in his cabin. High in the frozen Colorado mountains, a lonely man thought his life was meant to end in silence. But when a desperate knock echoes through his door on a storm-torn night, everything changes. He lets her in, offering warmth and food, never knowing her stepfather and a crooked deputy are hunting her down. She carries more than hunger and fear. Hidden in her mother's Bible is a secret deed that could topple the railroad's power and expose corruption in the town. Now, this quiet mountain man must choose: protect the girl who has awakened his heart, or hand her over to men who will destroy her. In a world where justice rides on horseback and mercy is weighed against greed, how far will one man go to defend innocence, and will faith be enough to keep them both alive? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind howled through the Colorado pines as William Boone trudged through knee-deep snow, checking his trap lines before nightfall. His leather boots crunched against the frozen ground with each careful step. The setting sun painted long shadows across the white landscape, and his breath came out in thick clouds that drifted away on the bitter breeze. William's large frame moved with practiced ease despite the cold. His calloused hands worked quickly to check and reset each trap, movements learned from years of solitary work in these mountains. A lone wolf's cry echoed in the distance, and William paused, listening. The sound struck a familiar chord in his heart. Another creature alone in the vastness. "Lord above," he whispered, his words carried away by the wind. "Thank you for this day's work." The prayer felt hollow in the gathering dusk, like so many before it. As darkness crept closer, William gathered his tools and the day's modest catch, 2 rabbits that would keep him fed for a few days. He turned toward home, his shoulders hunched against the wind that cut through his heavy wool coat. His cabin appeared through the trees like a dim beacon, smoke curling from the stone chimney. William had built it himself 10 years ago, every log and board placed by his own hands. It was a solid structure, well maintained, but tonight its solitude seemed to mock him. Inside, William lit the oil lamp that sat on his rough-hewn table. The familiar scent of wood smoke and leather filled the single room. He moved through his evening routine mechanically, hanging his coat, stoking the fire, setting water to boil for coffee. The cabin's warmth slowly seeped into his bones, but couldn't touch the cold spot in his chest. He pulled out his mother's Bible from its place of honor on the shelf, running his fingers over the worn leather cover. The pages fell open to Ecclesiastes, a passage he'd read countless times. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. William's throat tightened. At 35 years old, he'd never known a woman's touch, never held anyone close except his mother before she passed. The shame of it burned in his chest, mixed with a loneliness so deep it felt like a physical ache. He set about making his supper, beans he'd soaked that morning and cornbread from the last of his autumn cornmeal. The familiar tasks occupied his hands while his mind wandered. In town, folks treated him with respect for his skill as a trapper, but he saw the whispers, the sidelong glances. The young women giggled behind their hands when he passed, and the married men gave him looks of pity or confusion. William knew what they thought, that something must be wrong with him. Living alone up here, never courting, never marrying. Maybe they were right. Maybe God had meant for him to walk this solitary path. The beans bubbled in their pot, and he turned the cornbread in the cast-iron skillet to brown the other side. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the cabin's windows with increasing fury. William was grateful for his solid walls and warm hearth on such a night. He had just settled at his table, the lamp casting a warm glow over his simple meal, when he heard it, a frantic pounding at his door. The sound was so unexpected that for a moment he thought he'd imagined it. But it came again, desperate and weak. William rose slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle that hung by the door. "Who's there?" he called out, his deep voice steady despite his racing heart. The answer was barely audible through the thick wood. "Please, help me." Something in that voice, young, feminine, and terrified, made William's protective instincts override his usual caution. He unbarred the door and pulled it open, letting in a blast of snow and bitter wind. A slight figure stumbled forward, nearly falling. William caught her automatically, his large hands steadying thin shoulders. She was little more than a girl, her dark hair crusted with ice, her clothes far too thin for the weather. Her face was pale with cold, lips tinged blue, but her eyes were bright with desperation as she looked up at him. "Please," she begged through chattering teeth, "let me stay in your cabin tonight, or I'll die." William stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. Having a young woman in his cabin unchaperoned, it went against everything he believed in, but leaving her to freeze would be an even greater sin. "Come in," he said gruffly, stepping back to let her pass. "You're half frozen." She stumbled inside, and William quickly closed the door against the howling storm. The girl, she couldn't be more than 18, stood shivering violently in the middle of his cabin, snow melting from her clothes to pool on his wooden floor. "Sit by the fire," he ordered, pointing to his chair. "I'll fetch a blanket." She moved to obey, her movements stiff with cold. William retrieved his warmest blanket from his bed, a thick wool thing his mother had made years ago. When he turned back, the girl had pressed as close to the fire as she dared, her hands stretched out toward the flames. "Here," he said, draping the blanket around her shoulders. She clutched it tight, pulling it close around herself. Up close, William could see bruises on her wrists, partially hidden by her sleeves, and a healing cut above her eye. His jaw tightened at the sight. "Thank you," she whispered, her teeth still chattering. "I'm Sophia." "William Boone," he replied, moving to pour her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "What brings you out in weather like this?" Sophia's hands trembled as she accepted the cup, but her eyes met his steadily. "I'm running away," she said simply. "And I can't go back." William nodded slowly, reading the fear and determination in her face. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't his place to judge. "You're safe here," he said, meaning it. "At least until the storm passes." Relief flooded her features and tears welled in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away with the corner of the blanket. "Much obliged, Mr. Boone." "There's beans and cornbread," he offered, gesturing to his untouched supper. "You're welcome to share." Sophia's eyes widened at the sight of food, and William realized she must be starving. He grabbed another plate from his shelf and divided his meal, pushing the larger portion toward her. She ate carefully at first, then with increasing speed as her hunger took over. William sat across from her, picking at his own food while trying not to stare. Having another person in his cabin felt strange, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. The girl's presence filled the space in an unexpected way, making it feel more like a home than it had in years. Sophia finished her meal and set down her fork with careful precision. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger now. "I know it's not proper, me being here alone with you, but I had nowhere else to go." "The Lord brings people together for his own purposes," William said, the words coming naturally despite his inner turmoil. "You needed help. That's all that matters tonight." She smiled then, a small, grateful expression that transformed her tired face. "You're a good man, Mr. Boone." "I can tell." William felt his cheeks warm at the praise, and he busied himself clearing the plates. "You can take the bed," he said, not looking at her. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Oh no, I couldn't." Sophia started to protest, but William cut her off with a gentle firmness. "You need proper rest, the bed's warm, and I've slept plenty of nights by the fire." He paused, then added, No arguments. Sophia's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she nodded. Thank you. For everything. William showed her where to find extra blankets and assured her he would stay on his side of the cabin. As he arranged his bedroll by the hearth, he could hear her settling into his bed, the familiar creaks of the rope springs now making an unfamiliar melody. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin was warm and quiet. William lay awake for a long time, listening to Sophia's breathing, even out into sleep. His mind was full of questions about her past and concerns for her future, but underlying it all was a strange sense of rightness. Perhaps the Lord had indeed brought her to his door for a purpose. Just before sleep claimed him, William offered up another prayer, different from his usual solitary petitions. Lord, give me wisdom to help this child. And thank you for reminding me that even in these mountains, we're not meant to be alone. The lamplight cast dancing shadows as William helped Sophia to the chair nearest the fire. Up close, he could see how badly the cold had affected her. Her fingers were white at the tips, and her lips held a worrying bluish tinge. Her dress, though once fine, was torn and muddied from her journey. You're half frozen through, William said, his voice gruff with concern. He grabbed the thickest quilt from his bed and draped it around her shoulders. Stay put while I fix something hot to drink. Sophia nodded, pulling the quilt tight around herself. Her teeth had stopped chattering, but she still trembled. William moved to his small kitchen area, grateful he had some venison broth left from yesterday's cooking. He added more water to stretch it and set it to heat on the wood stove. While the broth warmed, William snuck glances at his unexpected guest. She couldn't have been more than 18 years old, with long, dark hair that had partially escaped its braid. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she sat straight-backed in the chair, her eyes alert as they took in her surroundings. The cabin wasn't much, just one room with a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, and the necessary cooking implements. But it was clean and solid, and right now it was the only shelter for miles around. When the broth was hot, William poured it into 2 tin cups. He handed one to Sophia, who wrapped her cold fingers around it gratefully. Drink slow, he cautioned. It's hot. She nodded and took a careful sip. Color began returning to her cheeks as the warm liquid did its work. After a few more sips, she spoke. I suppose you're wondering what brought me to your door on such a night. William settled into the other chair, cradling his own cup. Reckon you'll tell me when you're ready. Sophia's hands tightened around her cup. My stepfather, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He made arrangements in town to sell me. William's grip on his cup became white-knuckled. Sell you? She nodded, not meeting his eyes. To a man who owns the saloon. Said it would cover his gambling debts. Her voice grew stronger, though it shook with anger. I heard them planning it, talking about me like I was cattle to be traded. So I ran. You did right, William said firmly. The thought of anyone treating a young woman that way made his blood boil. No man has the right to sell another human being. I had no plan except to get away, Sophia continued. I've been walking for 2 days. When the storm hit, she shuddered. I thought I was going to die out there. Then I saw your chimney smoke. William stood and added another log to the fire. The Lord guided you here, he said simply. You need rest now. We can talk more in the morning. He gathered some clean clothes, an old shirt and pair of trousers that would be far too big for her, but better than her wet things. You can change behind the screen there, he said, pointing to the corner where he kept his wash basin. I'll turn my back. Sophia accepted the clothes with a grateful nod and disappeared behind the screen. William faced the fire, listening to the rustle of fabric and the howling wind outside. When she emerged, she was swimming in his clothes, but at least they were dry. Take the bed, he said, cutting off her protest before it could begin. I'll sleep here by the fire. It's plenty warm. Too exhausted to argue, Sophia climbed into his bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of deep sleep. William stayed awake longer, tending the fire and thinking. Having a young woman in his cabin went against everything proper, but he couldn't have turned her away. He prayed he was doing the right thing, and eventually drifted off to sleep himself. The next morning, William woke to an unfamiliar sound. Blinking in the early dawn light, he sat up from his bedroll to see Sophia outside through the window, efficiently chopping kindling with his axe. She had rolled up the sleeves of his oversized shirt and tied back her hair with a strip of cloth. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of pristine white. Sophia paused in her work, wiping her brow with her sleeve. "Morning, Mr. Boone," she said. "Hope you don't mind. I wanted to do something useful." William studied the neat pile of kindling she'd already accumulated. Her technique with the axe wasn't perfect, but she clearly knew how to handle tools. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Sophia straightened her shoulders. "I won't be a burden, Mr. Boone. I can work. I can cook and clean and help with whatever needs doing." The determination in her voice touched something in William's heart. Here was someone who'd been through hell, but refused to let it break her spirit. "Come on inside," he said. "Time for breakfast." In his cabin, William mixed cornmeal for Johnny cakes while Sophia insisted on frying up some salt pork. They worked together in comfortable silence, moving around each other in the small space as if they'd done it 100 times before. When the food was ready, William paused, clasping his hands. "I say grace before meals," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "You're welcome to join me." "I'd like that," Sophia said softly, bowing her head. William closed his eyes. "Lord, we thank you for this food, and for bringing us safely through the storm. We ask for your guidance and protection in the days ahead. Amen." "Amen," Sophia echoed. They ate together at his small table, the morning sun streaming through the window. William couldn't remember the last time he'd shared morning prayers with another person. Something warm and forgotten stirred in his chest, a feeling so foreign it almost frightened him. "These Johnny cakes are good," Sophia said, breaking into his thoughts. "My mother used to make them with a pinch of sugar when we could get it." "Your mother?" William asked carefully. Sophia's face softened with memory. "She died 3 years ago. That's when everything changed. Father had already passed, and then my stepfather." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "But that's done now. I won't go back." William nodded, understanding in his silence. They finished their meal, and Sophia insisted on washing the dishes while William went to check his trap lines. Standing in the doorway, pulling on his coat, William watched Sophia move purposefully around his cabin. She had already straightened his bed and was humming softly as she worked. The morning light caught her hair, turning it to deep copper where it escaped its braid. Hope. That was the feeling in his chest. For the first time in more years than he could count, William Boone felt hope. "I won't be gone long," he said. "There's more wood needs chopping if you've a mind to keep at it." Sophia smiled, and William noticed it reached her eyes this time. "I'll have it done before you return, Mr. Boone. And thank you again for everything." William ducked his head, unused to such genuine gratitude. "We'll figure things out," he said gruffly, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The snow crunched under his boots as he made his way down the familiar path to his trap lines. Behind him, he could hear the steady thunk of the axe as Sophia returned to her work. The sound echoed off the mountains, no longer lonely, but full of promise. The morning passed quietly as William and Sophia fell into an easy rhythm around the cabin. William mended his traps by the window, while Sophia explored the small space, familiarizing herself with its contents. Her eyes kept returning to the neat shelf where William's mother's books sat, their leather bindings worn smooth with age. When noon approached, Sophia began gathering ingredients for their meal. "I can make a proper stew," she offered, "if you've got dried beans and meat to spare." William nodded toward the storage chest. "Help yourself. There's dried venison in there too." Sophia worked methodically, soaking the beans and cutting the dried meat into small pieces. She added wild onions and herbs she found among William's stored provisions. The familiar task seemed to settle her, and she hummed softly as she worked. William found himself stealing glances at her as she moved about his cabin. It had been so long since anyone else had inhabited this space with him. The last woman to cook at his hearth had been his mother, before the fever took her 5 years ago. The memory made his chest tight. "My mother taught me this recipe," Sophia said, stirring the pot she'd hung over the fire. "She always said a good bean stew could stretch to feed whoever might come to your door." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." Sophia nodded, her eyes distant. "She was. She taught me everything I know about keeping a home." She paused, then added quietly, "Everything except reading." We never had books, and she couldn't read herself. William looked up from his work, studying her face as she stared into the cooking pot. "You can't read at all?" Sophia shook her head, a flush creeping up her neck. "My stepfather said there was no point in teaching a girl letters. Said it would only fill my head with foolish notions." William's jaw tightened at the mention of her stepfather. After a long moment, he set aside his trap and stood, walking to the shelf where his mother's books sat. His fingers traced the spine of the Bible, remembering how his mother had taught him his letters from these very pages. "Would you like to learn?" he asked, surprising himself with the offer. Sophia turned from the stew, her eyes wide. "You teach me?" William carefully took down the Bible and the hymnal. "My mother taught me from these books. She always said learning to read God's word was a blessing that should be shared." Sophia wiped her hands on her borrowed trousers and approached the table almost reverently. "I wouldn't want to damage your mother's books." "They're meant to be used," William said, opening the Bible to its first pages. "Here, sit down. We can start with some simple words while the stew cooks." Sophia settled beside him, her shoulder barely brushing his as she leaned in to see the page. William felt his ears grow warm at her proximity, but he focused on pointing to the first word. "In," he said clearly. "That's an easy one to start with. Just 2 letters." "In," Sophia repeated, studying the shapes. Her finger hovered over the word, not quite touching the page. "Go ahead," William encouraged. "Trace the letters." "That's how Mother taught me." Sophia gently traced the I and then the N. "In," she said again, smiling. They moved on to the and beginning, taking their time with each word. Sophia was a quick study, her enthusiasm making up for any initial awkwardness. When she successfully read God on her own, her face lit up with such joy that William couldn't help smiling in return. The afternoon passed this way, interrupted only by Sophia tending to the stew. The simple meal filled the cabin with warm, homey smells that made William's stomach rumble appreciatively. As they ate together that evening, Sophia suddenly said, "I never thanked you properly for taking me in last night." William shook his head. "No need for thanks. Couldn't leave you out in that storm." "I ran for hours," she admitted quietly, staring into her bowl. "Through the snow. My shoes fell apart about halfway through the first day. By the time I saw your chimney smoke, I couldn't feel my feet anymore." William's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. The image of her trudging through deep snow, barefoot and desperate, made his chest ache. "You're safe now," he said gruffly, surprising himself with the fierce protectiveness in his voice. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know," she whispered. "God led me to your door, Mr. Boone. I believe that with all my heart." After supper, they returned to their reading lesson until Sophia could barely keep her eyes open. William insisted she take his bed again, but she firmly refused. "You've already given up your bed once," she said, arranging blankets near the hearth. "I won't put you out of it again." William watched as she settled onto her makeshift bedroll, curling up beneath the blankets like a child. The firelight played across her features, softening them in sleep. She looked so young, so vulnerable, yet she carried herself with such strength. Kneeling beside his own bed, William closed his eyes in prayer. "Lord," he whispered, "protect this child you've brought to my door. Guide me in helping her." And he hesitated, then added, "Thank you for easing the loneliness of this place." He glanced once more at Sophia's sleeping form before climbing into his own bed. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow. Not just from the stew that had simmered all day, but from something else. Something that felt remarkably like hope. The fire crackled softly, and outside, an owl called into the night. William listened to Sophia's steady breathing, remembering how his mother used to pray over him when she thought he was sleeping. Quietly, so as not to wake her, he whispered, "Lord, watch over her as she sleeps. Keep her safe from those who would harm her, and give her peace in her dreams. Amen." In the darkness, Sophia smiled slightly in her sleep, and William felt a peace settle over the cabin that he hadn't known in years. The morning sun had barely risen when the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the peaceful quiet of the cabin. William, who had been stoking the breakfast fire, froze. His eyes met Sophia's across the room, and he saw raw terror flash across her face. "Quick," he whispered urgently. "Hide in the root cellar." Sophia scrambled toward the trapdoor, but before she could reach it, a commanding voice rang out from outside. "William Boone, show yourself." William's hands trembled as he straightened his shirt. He recognized that voice. Deputy Clayton, known throughout the territory for taking whatever side paid best. The sound of multiple horses shuffling in the snow told him the deputy hadn't come alone. "Stay behind me," William murmured to Sophia, who now stood rooted in place, her face pale as the snow outside. He moved toward the door, his heart pounding against his ribs. When he opened it, the sight that greeted him made his stomach turn. Deputy Clayton sat astride his dappled mare, flanked by 4 other mounted men. Among them was a heavy-set man with cold eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth. Even without Sophia's sharp intake of breath, William would have known this was her stepfather. "Morning, Deputy," William said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What brings you up the mountain on such a cold day?" Deputy Clayton's badge gleamed dully in the winter light. "We're here about stolen property, Boone. A young woman ran away 2 days ago, legally bound to her stepfather here." He gestured to the heavy-set man. "Mr. Rodriguez has papers proving his guardianship." William felt Sophia trembling behind him. He shifted his weight, making sure he completely blocked the doorway with his broad frame. "Only property I got here is what's rightfully mine," William said carefully. "My traps, my supplies, and this cabin my father built." Sophia's stepfather spurred his horse forward. "Don't play games with us, Boone. That girl belongs to me until she's of age or married. The law's clear on that." His voice carried the sharp edge of ownership. "Hand her over now and we'll forget about charging you with theft." William's fingers curled into fists at his sides. "A person ain't property, Mr. Rodriguez, no matter what papers you might have." "Now see here," Deputy Clayton cut in, his hand moving to rest on his holstered pistol. "You're interfering with the law, Boone. That's a serious offense." The other men began spreading out, forming a loose half-circle around the cabin's entrance. William could feel sweat forming on his back despite the cold. He'd never been one for confrontation, preferring the solitude of his trapping lines to the complications of town. But now, with Sophia shaking behind him, he found a strength he didn't know he possessed. "Deputy," William said, his voice stronger now, "I respect the law. But I respect God's law first, and his law says we protect the innocent." He straightened to his full height, towering in the doorway. "I won't be handing anyone over to face abuse." Rodriguez's face darkened with rage. "You dare accuse me?" "We all heard the stories," William interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "About how you treated your first wife. About the bruises your servants try to hide. I won't let that happen to Sophia." Deputy Clayton's eyes narrowed. "This is your last chance, Boone. Step aside, or we'll come back with more men. And next time, we won't be so polite." "You do what you have to do, Deputy," William replied, his voice quiet but firm. "But I'll do what's right by God and my conscience." The deputy and Rodriguez exchanged dark looks. After a tense moment, Clayton reined his horse around. "You've made your choice, Boone. We'll be back, and you'll regret this stubbornness." The posse wheeled their horses, snow flying from their hooves as they turned. Rodriguez lingered a moment longer, his cold eyes boring into William. "You're a fool, Boone," he spat. "That girl's brought nothing but trouble to everyone who's tried to help her. She'll ruin you too." William stood silent, watching until the riders disappeared into the trees. Only then did he close the door, his hands shaking as he dropped the heavy wooden bar into place. When he turned, he found Sophia crumpled on the floor, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her whole body shuddering. "I've ruined everything. Your peaceful life, your safety, all because of me." William knelt beside her, his heart aching at her distress. "No, child. You haven't ruined anything." He awkwardly patted her shoulder, unused to offering comfort. "The Lord sent you to my door for a reason. I aim to see his purpose through." Sophia looked up at him through tear-filled eyes. "But they'll come back. With more men. With guns. They'll hurt you, maybe even kill you. All because you tried to help me. Then we'll be ready," William said with more confidence than he felt. He stood, surveying the cabin with new eyes. "We can fortify the windows, stack firewood against the walls for extra protection. The snow's falling heavier now. That'll slow them down. Give us time to prepare." Sophia wiped her eyes, her natural resilience beginning to show through her fear. "Tell me what to do. I want to help." They spent the rest of the morning securing the cabin. William showed Sophia how to wedge split logs between the window frames while he moved heavy furniture to create defensive positions. They filled every water barrel and container they could find, knowing they might need to withstand a siege. As the day wore on, the snow began falling more heavily, thick flakes obscuring the view beyond the cabin's windows. The weather was both blessing and curse. It would make travel difficult for Rodriguez and his men, but it also meant they were truly isolated. No chance of seeking help from the nearest settlement, not until the storm passed. By evening, they had done all they could to prepare. The cabin felt different now, more fortress than home. William built up the fire while Sophia prepared a simple supper of cornbread and beans. Neither felt much like eating, but they forced themselves to keep up their strength. "We should take turns keeping watch tonight," Sophia said, as she cleared away their barely touched plates. "I can take the first shift." William shook his head firmly. "You need your rest. I'm used to long nights from tracking winter game. I'll wake you if there's trouble." Sophia looked ready to argue but must have seen something in his expression that changed her mind. Instead, she nodded and began preparing her bedroll by the hearth. As she settled down, William checked the rifles one final time, his own trusted hunting piece and his father's old Spencer carbine from the war. He positioned himself near the window, where he could see the approach to the cabin while staying hidden from view. The snow continued falling, painting the world in white silence. The fire crackled softly, and William could hear Sophia's breathing eventually even out as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. He kept his vigil, moving quietly between windows, checking and rechecking their defenses. His mother's Bible lay open on the table, and in the moments between watches, he found himself reading the familiar passages about David hiding from Saul, about Daniel in the lion's den. Stories of God's protection in times of danger. "Lord," he prayed silently, watching the snow swirl in the darkness, "give me the strength to protect her. Show me the way through this trial." The night stretched on, marked only by the steady fall of snow and the soft sound of Sophia's breathing. William's hands stayed close to his rifle, his eyes scanning the white darkness beyond the cabin's walls, waiting for whatever morning might bring. The storm's fury kept them sheltered inside the cabin for days. Wind howled through the pine trees, and snow piled deeper against the walls. While the weather trapped them inside, it also kept Rodriguez's posse at bay. No man, no matter how determined, could safely traverse these heights in such conditions. William and Sophia fell into an easy rhythm of shared work. The cabin, usually silent save for the crackle of the fire, now hummed with quiet activity. In the mornings they would pray together, William's deep voice mixing with Sophia's softer tones as they read from his mother's Bible. On their second morning of confinement, William showed Sophia how to repair his damaged traps. Her small fingers proved nimbler than his at working the metal mechanisms. "My ma taught me to sew when I was little," Sophia explained, expertly threading wire through a spring. "This ain't so different, just metal instead of cloth." William watched her work, impressed by her quick learning. "You've got a gift for it." He gathered more traps from his pile. "Reckon you could help me fix the whole lot?" Sophia's face brightened at being useful. "I'd like that." They worked, side by side at the rough-hewn table, the broken traps slowly becoming whole again. William found himself stealing glances at her concentrated expression, the way her tongue poked out slightly when she tackled a particularly difficult repair. The afternoons were spent stretching and preparing hides from William's previous hunts. He showed Sophia how to scrape the skins clean and stretch them on frames. Despite the tedious nature of the work, she never complained. "These will fetch a good price come spring," William explained, running his hand over a particularly fine beaver pelt. "Might even get enough for some proper supplies." Sophia nodded, carefully scraping a hide. "You're good at this life, William. Living off the land, I mean. Most men I knew in town just took what they wanted, never thinking about tomorrow." William felt his ears grow warm at the praise. "Just doing what needs doing," he mumbled. On the third day, William managed to snare several rabbits in the protected area behind the cabin. When he brought them inside, Sophia's eyes lit up. "I can make something special with these," she said, already reaching for her gathering pouch. She pulled out several dried plants, explaining, "I collected these on my journey. Sage, wild thyme. My mother taught me which ones were good for cooking." That evening, the cabin filled with an aroma that made William's mouth water. Sophia had transformed the humble rabbits into a savory stew, the herbs lending a flavor he'd never tasted in his own simple cooking. As they ate by the fire, Sophia grew quiet, stirring her stew absently. "My mother," she said softly. "She loved cooking with herbs. Said it was one way to make beauty in a hard world." She swallowed hard. "After she died, my stepfather, he wouldn't let me near her things. Said cooking was for servants, not his daughter." William set his bowl down, anger stirring at the mention of Rodriguez. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." Sophia nodded, wiping at her eyes. "She taught me to read the Bible in Spanish, but Rodriguez burned her copy when he found it. Said I needed to forget all that now that I was his to raise." Her voice grew bitter. "To raise or to sell to the highest bidder." William's hands tightened on his bowl. "No man has the right to sell another. That ain't God's way. My mother used to say the same." Sophia managed a small smile. "She'd tell me, 'Mijita, remember you belong to God first, no matter what any man claims.'" They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire casting warm shadows on the walls. William realized he'd grown used to having someone to talk with, to share the evening hours that used to stretch so long and lonely. On the fourth day, while Sophia prepared their morning meal, William set himself to mending his collection of traps. The metal parts needed regular attention to prevent rust, and several springs had weakened over the season. He was so focused on his work that he didn't immediately notice Sophia's gasp from across the room. When he looked up, she was standing by his mother's Bible shelf, holding something in trembling hands. "William," she whispered, come out. "My, come look at this." He set aside his tools and crossed to her. Sophia held a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age but still intact. Her fingers shook as she carefully unfolded it. "It was hidden in the binding of my mother's prayer book," she explained, voice tight with emotion. "I never knew. All this time." William leaned closer, squinting at the formal writing. His eyes widened as he realized what he was seeing. "This is a deed," he said slowly. "To land near the town." And he traced the words with his finger. "Water rights to Cedar Creek." Sophia's breath caught. "Cedar Creek? Isn't that where the railroad's been trying to build their watering station?" William finished. "They've been buying up every piece of land along that creek they can find." He looked at Sophia with new understanding. "Your mother must have hidden this to protect it from your stepfather." Sophia sank into a chair, the deed clutched to her chest. He must have known. That's why he was so desperate to control me, to marry me off to his friends. He needed my signature to sell. The land. Tears spilled down her cheeks. My mother made sure I would have something of my own, something he couldn't take. William pulled another chair close, sitting beside her. "This changes things," he said quietly. "That land, it's worth more than gold to the railroad. They need that water for their steam engines, and Cedar Creek's the only reliable source for miles." Sophia looked up at him, determination replacing her tears. "Then we have something to fight with now." "Something besides just running and hiding." William nodded slowly, his mind working through the implications. The deed wasn't just paper. It was power. The kind of power that could force Rodriguez to back down, that could give Sophia her freedom. "We'll need to be careful," he cautioned. "That paper's valuable enough to make some men desperate, and Rodriguez won't take kindly to finding out you hold something he's wanted all along." Sophia carefully refolded the deed, her movements deliberate and controlled. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said firmly. "My mother protected this for me. Now it's my turn to use it the way she would have wanted, to build something good, something free." William watched her tuck the deed safely away, marveling at her strength. The frightened girl who had appeared at his door seemed transformed, replaced by a young woman with steel in her spine and purpose in her heart. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were planning. The deed changed everything, giving them a weapon more powerful than any rifle. Now they had a chance not just to survive, but to win justice. As they returned to their tasks, William to his traps, Sophia to her cooking, the air hummed with new possibility. The cabin felt different, charged with purpose rather than fear. Whatever came next, they would face it together, armed with more than just courage and prayer. They had truth on their side now, written in ink and sealed in law. And truth, William reminded himself, was God's most powerful weapon against those who would do evil. William sat at his rough-hewn table, staring at the deed Sophia had discovered. The lamplight caught the official seal, making it gleam like a copper penny. His calloused fingers traced the precise lettering, mind churning with worry. "Maybe we ought to keep this hidden a while longer," he said, glancing at Sophia, who stood by the hearth. "Once folks know you have it, there'll be no going back." Sophia stirred the morning porridge with steady strokes, her back straight. "My mother didn't hide this deed just so I could hide it again," she said firmly. "She wanted me to have a future, William. A real one, not the kind my stepfather planned." William watched her move about his cabin with growing certainty, no longer the frightened girl who'd appeared at his door. The firelight caught the determination in her eyes, reminding him of steel catching sunlight. "Reckon you're right," he admitted. "But we'll need to be careful about how we do this." Sophia ladled porridge into their tin bowls, setting one before him. "The storm's breaking," she observed, nodding toward the window, where pale morning light filtered through thinning clouds. "God's giving us a sign." William couldn't argue with that. The heavy snow that had kept them isolated was finally letting up, the wind dying down to occasional gusts. He knew they couldn't stay hidden in his cabin forever. though part of him wished they could. After breakfast, they began preparations for the journey. William pulled his small wooden sled from beneath the cabin's overhang, checking the runners for damage. Sophia gathered provisions, dried meat, cornmeal, the last of their beans, wrapping everything carefully in oilcloth. "Jenny will manage the sled fine," William said, referring to his elderly mule. "She's steady on mountain trails, even in snow." They packed carefully, including extra blankets and William's canvas tent piece. Sophia tucked the precious deed into an oilskin pouch, then secured it inside her coat. William made sure his rifle was cleaned and loaded, though he prayed he wouldn't need it. The sun had climbed past morning when they finally set out. William led Jenny by her bridle, the mule picking her way carefully through the snow. Sophia walked beside him, her borrowed boots leaving neat prints alongside his larger ones. The sled's runners made twin grooves behind them, marking their passage down the mountain. William kept alert, scanning the white-draped forest for any sign of pursuit. But the only movement came from occasional snow sliding off pine boughs or a startled grouse bursting from cover. The air was crisp and clean, their breath forming clouds that drifted away on the light breeze. "It's beautiful," Sophia said softly as they paused to rest Jenny. "I've never seen the mountains like this, all peaceful and white." William nodded, understanding what she meant. The snow transformed everything, softening harsh edges and muffling sounds until the world seemed wrapped in silence. Even Jenny's hoof-falls were quiet, absorbed by the thick white blanket beneath them. They made steady progress through the shortened winter day, but William knew they wouldn't reach town before nightfall. As the sun began to sink, he led them to a sheltered hollow he knew well from his trapping runs. "We'll camp here," he said, helping Sophia down a slight slope to where several large pines created a natural windbreak. "Ground's fairly level and there's dry wood under these trees." Working together, they quickly set up camp. William showed Sophia how to string the canvas between trees to make a lean-to, while he gathered pine boughs to lay beneath their blankets. Soon, they had a small fire going, its flames casting warm light on the snow around them. Sophia proved skilled at camp cooking, making a hearty meal from their provisions. They ate sitting close to the fire, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky above the gap in the trees. "I never really saw the stars before," Sophia admitted, leaning back to gaze upward. "In town, there were always buildings in the way. And at my stepfather's ranch," she shuddered slightly, "I wasn't allowed outside after dark." William looked at her profile in the firelight, seeing both strength and lingering hurt there. "You're free now," he said quietly. "Free to look at stars whenever you want." Sophia turned to meet his gaze, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know it might sound strange," she said softly, "but I've never felt as safe as I do right now, here in the wilderness with you." William's heart squeezed at her words. He wanted to reach for her hand but held back, conscious of propriety. Instead, he added another stick to the fire, watching sparks spiral upward toward the stars. "Ain't strange at all," he finally said. "Sometimes God's peace finds us in unexpected places." They settled down to sleep, Sophia on one side of the fire, William on the other. He stayed awake long after her breathing steadied, keeping watch over their small camp, over her. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called to its mate. Morning brought clear skies and easier traveling. The trail descended steadily now, winding through stands of aspen and pine. By late afternoon, they caught their first glimpse of the settlement below, a cluster of buildings gathered around the white-painted church, thin streams of smoke rising from chimneys into the cold air. William felt Sophia tense beside him as they paused to look down at the town. He knew she was thinking of her stepfather, of the danger that might await them there. "Reverend Carter's a good man," he assured her, pointing to the church. "He'll give you sanctuary, while we sort this out proper and legal." He touched the brim of his hat, a habit when speaking of serious matters. "I promise you that, Sophia." You won't face this alone." Sophia straightened her shoulders, though her voice wavered slightly. "I believe you, William." She patted the place where the deed lay hidden. "My mother believed in prayer and justice. Now we'll see if the town believes in them too." They stood together for a moment longer, watching the smoke rise from the chimneys below. The sun was setting behind them, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. William felt the weight of what lay ahead, but also a surge of righteous purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Jenny stomped a hoof impatiently, bringing them back to the present task. William adjusted her bridle, and they began the final leg of their journey down toward the town. The sled's runners cut fresh tracks in the snow, marking their path like the lines of a story not yet finished. The church bell rang clear and bright in the crisp morning air as William and Sophia approached the white-painted building. Its weathered boards gleamed in the winter sunlight, the steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way. Reverend Carter stood at the front steps, his lean figure wrapped in a worn black coat, a welcoming smile warming his weathered face. "William Boone," the preacher called out, descending the steps. "It's been too long since you've graced our congregation." His kind eyes shifted to Sophia, noting her borrowed clothes and weary stance. "And who might this young lady be?" William removed his hat, holding it respectfully. "Reverend Carter, this here's Sophia. She's—" He glanced at her, seeking permission to continue. Sophia stepped forward, her chin lifted despite her obvious exhaustion. "I've come seeking sanctuary, Reverend, and justice if God wills it." The preacher's expression grew serious. He gestured toward the church door. "Come inside, both of you. We'll talk where it's warm." Inside, the single room was quiet, except for the crackle of the pot-bellied stove. Sunlight streamed through simple glass windows, casting rainbow patterns from the few colored panes across the wooden pews. The Reverend led them to his small office, really just a corner sectioned off by a curtain. William and Sophia sat in straight-back chairs, while Reverend Carter settled behind his modest desk. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she withdrew the oilskin pouch from inside her coat. William noticed and wished he could steady them with his own. "My mother left me this," Sophia explained, carefully unfolding the deed. "She hid it in her Bible before she died, knowing my stepfather would try to take it if he found it." The Reverend examined the document carefully, his finger tracing the official seals and signatures. "This appears entirely legitimate," he said finally. 20 acres along Sweetwater Creek, with full water rights." He looked up sharply. "That's the very water the railroad's been trying to secure for their planned route." William nodded grimly. "That's why her stepfather's so keen to control her, Reverend. He aimed to sell her off, then claim the land as his own. He sent men after me," Sophia added quietly. "If William hadn't taken me in." She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Reverend Carter's face darkened with righteous anger. "The Lord abhors such wickedness." He carefully refolded the deed. "I'll keep this safe in the church strongbox until we can have it properly recorded with the territorial authorities." He smiled gently at Sophia. "You did right to come here, child. The Lord's house is a refuge for those in need." William felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. The preacher's support meant everything, not just his moral authority, but his practical help in navigating legal matters. "Sunday service is tomorrow," Reverend Carter continued. "I suggest you both attend. It'll give the townsfolk a chance to meet Sophia properly, hear her story." He looked meaningfully at William. "The railroad's made more enemies than friends hereabouts. People understand the importance of standing together." That night, Sophia stayed in the church's small back room, usually reserved for visiting preachers. William took a room at the boarding house across the street, though he slept little, his ears straining for any sound of trouble. Sunday dawned bright and cold. William dressed in his best clothes, a somewhat shabby suit that had belonged to his father. When he arrived at the church, he found Sophia already there, wearing a borrowed dress from the preacher's wife. Despite its ill fit, she carried herself with dignity. The church filled steadily as townsfolk arrived. William recognized many faces: ranchers, shopkeepers, families who'd carved out lives in this high country. They glanced curiously at Sophia, but their expressions held more sympathy than suspicion. Reverend Carter's sermon spoke of justice and mercy, of God's special care for the widow and orphan. Without directly mentioning Sophia's situation, he reminded his congregation of their duty to stand against wickedness and support the vulnerable. "The Lord calls us to be more than merely good," he proclaimed, his voice filling the small church. "He calls us to be righteous, to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God." William watched Sophia during the service. She followed along intently as the congregation sang hymns, her lips moving silently as she tried to learn the words. During prayers, her head bowed deeply, and he wondered what petition she offered up to heaven. After the service, the congregation gathered for their traditional potluck dinner. Tables were set up in the churchyard, despite the cold, loaded with steaming dishes: beans, cornbread, roasted meat, and pies. Women pressed plates into Sophia's hands, urging her to eat. Men gathered in small groups, their expressions grim as they discussed the railroad's recent actions. "Tried to force old Thompson to sell last month," William overheard one rancher say. "Threatened to run their tracks right through his best grazing land if he didn't." "Ain't right," another agreed. "Man's worked that spread 30 years. Railroad thinks money can buy anything." Sophia moved among them gracefully, answering questions with quiet dignity. William noticed how she spoke of her mother's faith, her desire to honor the legacy she'd been left. The townsfolk nodded approvingly, especially the older women who remembered their own struggles as pioneers. As the winter sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, people gradually departed for their homes. William helped clean up, carrying dishes back into the church. He found Sophia in the kitchen, washing plates alongside several other women. "Much obliged for all your kindness," she was saying. "I never expected such a welcome." "Nonsense, child," one gray-haired woman replied. "We take care of our own here." William's heart swelled at those words. He'd kept himself apart from this community for so long, nursing his loneliness. Now, watching Sophia being embraced by these good people, he felt something shift inside him, like a frozen stream beginning to thaw in spring. Later, as darkness settled over the town, William knelt beside his bed at the boarding house. Prayer had always been private for him, a quiet communion between himself and God. But tonight, words spilled from his lips audibly, full of gratitude and hope. "Lord," he prayed, "I thank you for bringing Sophia to safety. Thank you for Reverend Carter's wisdom and the town's kindness. Guide us in the days ahead. Show us your path to justice." He didn't know Sophia could hear him through the thin boarding house walls, didn't see her press her hands together and add her own silent amen to his prayers. But God saw them both, the mountain man and the brave young woman, each finding strength in faith and newfound community. The night deepened around the sleeping town. In the church strongbox, Sophia's deed lay secure, its presence a promise of justice to come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, peace reigned. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and clear in the mountain sky, while below, hope had taken root and begun to grow. The settlement bustled with life as morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow. William stood outside the smithy, watching his breath cloud in the crisp air. The familiar ring of hammer on anvil echoed from within, a steady rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He'd offered his help to Henry, the blacksmith, knowing that every pair of strong hands mattered in a frontier town. "Much obliged for the help," Henry called out, wiping sweat from his brow despite the winter chill. "These horseshoes won't shape themselves." William nodded, rolling up his sleeves. The work was hard but honest, and it kept his mind from wandering too often to thoughts of Sophia. Still, his eyes drifted regularly toward the church, where she spent her days with the women of the congregation. Inside the church's meeting room, Sophia sat among a circle of women, her fingers growing more confident with each stitch. Mrs. Carter, the preacher's wife, had organized a quilting circle, though everyone knew it was as much about welcoming Sophia as it was about needlework. "You have a natural talent for this," Mrs. Carter said, examining Sophia's even stitches. "Did your mother teach you?" Sophia nodded, her throat tight with memory. "She taught me everything she could before she passed. Said a woman needs to know how to make something beautiful from scraps." The other women murmured in understanding. They shared stories as they worked, tales of their own arrivals in the settlement, of hardships overcome, and homes built from nothing. Sophia soaked in their wisdom like parched earth drinking rain. At midday, William took his dinner break, sitting on a bench outside the smithy. He couldn't help but smile when he saw Sophia emerge from the church, carrying a basket. She walked toward him, her dark hair catching the winter light. "The ladies insisted I bring you some dinner," she said, setting the basket between them. "They say you're working too hard." William's rough hands were careful as he unwrapped a cloth-covered biscuit. "Reckon they're just being kind." "No," Sophia said softly. "They're being truthful." Her eyes met his, warm and sincere. "You work harder than anyone I've ever known, William Boone." A comfortable silence fell between them as they shared the simple meal. Around them, townspeople went about their business. Children running errands, merchants calling to customers, the stagecoach rattling past with mail and supplies. That afternoon, William's muscles ached from the smithy work, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in years. Every so often, he caught glimpses of Sophia through the church windows, her head bent over her work, sometimes laughing at something one of the women said. As evening approached, Sophia finished helping the church women clean up after their sewing day. Mrs. Carter touched her arm gently. "You're welcome here any time, dear. We've all taken quite a shine to you." Sophia's eyes glistened. "Thank you. I never expected." She paused, composing herself. "I never expected to find such kindness among strangers." "We're not strangers anymore," Mrs. Carter said firmly. "We're neighbors now." Outside, William waited, having finished his day's work at the smithy. Together, they walked down the settlement's main street, their boots crunching in the snow. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of pink and gold. "The women taught me so much today," Sophia said, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "About sewing, yes, but also about building a life here. They all started with nothing, just like me." William nodded, understanding in his bones. Sometimes nothing is exactly what you need to build something true. They paused at the corner near the general store, watching as lamplight began to glow in windows along the street. The evening air grew sharper with cold, but neither seemed eager to end their walk. William cleared his throat, his heart pounding harder than it had all day at the smithy. "Sophia," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been thinking." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with attention. "These past days, having you at the cabin," he struggled to find the right words. "Well, I reckon I've never felt less alone in my life. And I was wondering if you ever thought about making it permanent-like. Staying, I mean, with me." Sophia's breath caught, visible in the cold air. A blush deeper than the winter chill spread across her cheeks. "William," she said softly, "your cabin already feels more like home than anywhere I've ever been." The joy that spread through William's chest was almost painful in its intensity. He opened his mouth to speak again, but the moment was broken by rapid footsteps approaching. They turned to see young Tommy, the telegraph operator's son, running toward them, a yellow paper clutched in his hand. "Deputy Clayton," he called out, rushing past them toward the sheriff's office. "Urgent telegram for the deputy." William and Sophia exchanged worried glances. Through the office window they could see Deputy Clayton's face harden as he read the message. His eyes lifted, meeting theirs through the glass with cold calculation. "We should head back to the church," William said quietly, placing a protective hand on Sophia's elbow. They both knew what that telegram likely contained. The railroad wouldn't give up its plans for the water rights without a fight. As they walked back through the gathering dusk, their earlier moment of tenderness seemed to hover between them, precious but uncertain. Sophia's hand found William's, and he marveled at how small it felt in his calloused grip. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "we'll face it together." William squeezed her hand gently. "Together," he agreed, the word feeling like a prayer in his mouth. They reached the church just as Reverend Carter was lighting the evening lamps. The warm glow spilled out onto the snow, creating pools of golden light. Inside, the air still held the day's warmth and the lingering scent of coffee and fresh-baked bread from the women's gathering. The Reverend looked up as they entered, noting their clasped hands with a gentle smile. "I trust you've had a good day." "Yes, Reverend," Sophia answered, though she didn't release William's hand. "Everyone has been so kind." "Kindness is the language God speaks through us," the Reverend said. He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I saw Tommy running with that telegram. I expect we'll know soon enough what the railroad's next move will be." William nodded grimly. "We saw Deputy Clayton reading it. Didn't look like good news." "No," the Reverend agreed. "I don't expect it was. But remember," he looked at them both intently, "you have friends here now. The whole town has seen what kind of people you are these past 2 days. We stand together against bullies and thieves, whether they wear badges or business suits." Sophia's grip tightened on William's hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes of trust, of growing affection, of determination to face whatever came next. William felt strength flow through that connection, as if their shared touch completed a circuit of hope and courage. They said their good nights to the Reverend and stepped back into the evening air. The street was quiet now, most folks having retired to their homes for supper. A few windows still glowed with lamplight, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked at the rising moon. At the door of the boarding house where Sophia was staying, they lingered, neither wanting to break the connection of their joined hands. "Thank you," Sophia said finally, "for asking me to stay. For wanting me to stay." William's voice was rough with emotion. "Thanking me for wanting what makes my heart whole? That don't seem right." Sophia's free hand reached up to touch his cheek, her fingers gentle against his stubbled jaw. The gesture was brief but full of promise, like the first star appearing in the evening sky. As William walked to his own lodgings, his cheek still tingling from her touch, he found himself looking up at the vast Colorado sky. The stars were emerging one by one, bright and clear in the mountain air. He thought about how much his life had changed since that snowy night when Sophia knocked on his cabin door, how the walls of his solitude had crumbled, how his heart had awakened to possibilities he'd long since abandoned. In his room, he knelt for his evening prayers, but found himself wordless before God. How could he express gratitude for something so vast, so transformative? In the end, he simply whispered, "Thank you," knowing that the Lord would understand all that his heart contained. Through the thin walls, he could hear the soft sounds of Sophia preparing for bed in her own room. The simple domestic noises, water being poured, floorboards creaking, blankets being turned down, filled him with a profound sense of rightness. Whatever the railroad's telegram had contained, whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew with bone-deep certainty that he would face them with Sophia by his side. The winter night had settled deep and cold over the settlement. William tossed restlessly in his boarding house bed, his thoughts full of Sophia's gentle touch on his cheek and the promise of their future together. The town clock struck midnight, its lonely chime echoing through the empty streets. A gunshot shattered the silence. William bolted upright, his heart hammering. More shots followed, then screams, coming from the direction of the parsonage. He threw on his coat and boots, grabbing his rifle as he rushed into the bitter night air. The snow crunched beneath his feet as he ran toward the church. Ahead, lantern light bobbed erratically, and dark figures moved in the shadows. A woman's cry pierced the darkness, Sophia's voice. "No, please." William's blood ran cold. He raised his rifle and quickened his pace, but the deep snow slowed his progress. As he rounded the corner of the church, he saw them. Deputy Clayton and Sophia's stepfather dragging her between them toward waiting horses. The parsonage door hung broken on its hinges. "Let her go!" William's voice boomed across the churchyard. Deputy Clayton spun, his revolver already drawn. The shot cracked through the night air before William could squeeze his trigger. Searing pain exploded in his shoulder, spinning him backward into the snow. His rifle flew from his grasp. Through blurring vision, he saw Sophia fighting like a wildcat, kicking and scratching at her captors. "William!" she screamed. "William!" Her stepfather backhanded her across the face. The sound of it cut William deeper than any bullet could. He tried to push himself up, but another blow, this time from Clayton's boot, caught him in the temple. The world tilted sideways. "Ain't so tough now, are you, mountain man?" Clayton sneered, standing over him. "Should have stayed in your cabin where you belong." William fought to stay conscious, reaching weakly for Sophia. Through the haze, he saw her stepfather wave a familiar piece of paper. The deed. They must have beaten its location out of Reverend Carter. "Got what we came for," Sophia's stepfather growled. "Let's go." They dragged Sophia toward the horses, her boots leaving desperate furrows in the snow. William tried once more to rise, but Clayton's boot caught him in the ribs. Something cracked inside him. The pain was immense, but Sophia's terrified sobs hurt worse. "William! Please, God, help!" Her voice cut off as they forced a gag into her mouth. The last thing William saw before darkness took him was Sophia being thrown across a saddle, her dark hair streaming in the winter wind. Then everything went black. Dawn's weak light was filtering through the clouds when William's eyes fluttered open. Every breath sent daggers through his chest. The snow around him was stained crimson, and his clothes were stiff with frozen blood. "William," a weak voice called from the parsonage. "William, can you hear me?" He turned his head, fighting waves of dizziness. "Reverend!" "In here, son. I need help." William forced himself to his hands and knees, nearly blacking out from the pain. The world spun sickeningly as he crawled toward the broken door. Inside, the parsonage was a scene of violence. Overturned furniture, scattered papers, broken glass. Reverend Carter lay crumpled beside his desk, his face badly beaten. Blood matted his gray hair, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. "Thank God," he whispered when he saw William. "I feared they'd killed you." William slumped against the wall beside him, his shoulder throbbing. "Sophia," he managed. "They took Sophia." "I know." The Reverend's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. William." "They came for the deed. I tried to stop them, but—" He gestured weakly at his injuries. "They found it in my Bible. I should have hidden it better." "Not your fault," William said, though despair threatened to overwhelm him. "Which way did they go?" "William, you're hurt." "Which way?" The Reverend closed his eyes briefly. "I heard them say something about the railroad camp up at Eagle Creek. But son, you can't—" "I have to." William used the wall to pull himself to his feet, fighting back nausea. "She needs me. You'll die trying to rescue her alone." "Then I'll die trying." William's voice was firm despite his pain. "But I won't abandon her." The Reverend tried to sit up, wincing. "Let me send for help." "The sheriff in Fairplay would—" "No time." William cut him off. "By then that deed will be in railroad hands. And Sophia—" He couldn't finish the thought. "Can you make it to Doc Miller's on your own?" "I think so. It's not far." William nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through his head. "I'll saddle your horse for you first." "William," the Reverend caught his sleeve, "pray with me before you go." William wanted to refuse. Every moment wasted was another moment Sophia suffered. But he saw the need in the older man's eyes. Together, they bowed their heads. "Lord," Reverend Carter's voice trembled, "protect these your children. Guide William's path and give him strength beyond his own. Shield Sophia from harm and let justice prevail against evil. In Jesus' name, amen." "Amen," William echoed, though his heart felt hollow with fear. It took precious minutes to help the Reverend to his feet and get him settled on his horse. The old man could barely sit upright, but he insisted he could make it to the doctor's house. "God be with you, son," he said as William turned to go. William looked back one last time. "Pray for us, Reverend." He retrieved his rifle from the snow, checking that it hadn't been damaged in the fall. His shoulder screamed in protest as he worked the action, but the mechanism seemed sound. He had 4 cartridges left in his pocket. It would have to be enough. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the trampled snow. William read the signs of the kidnapper's passage. 3 horses heading north toward Eagle Creek. His own horse was stabled at the livery, but that would mean backtracking through town. He couldn't spare the time. Instead, he cut through the church cemetery toward the trail that led into the hills. Each step sent fresh waves of pain through his battered body, but he forced himself forward. Sophia needed him. Nothing else mattered. The morning air bit at his face as he followed their tracks, moving as fast as his injuries would allow. His breath came in ragged clouds, and blood still seeped from his shoulder, but he barely noticed. His whole world had narrowed to the trail ahead, and the desperate prayer beating in time with his footsteps. "Please, God, please, let me reach her in time." The tracks led up into the foothills where the snow lay deeper and the wind cut like a knife. William recognized the path. It would take them past the old silver mine and up to where the railroad had made its camp. The same camp that had been trying to force local ranchers off their land for months. His ribs grated with every breath, and dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. The bullet wound in his shoulder had stopped bleeding, but only because the blood had frozen. He knew. He was pushing his body far beyond its limits, but he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Not while Sophia was in danger. The sun climbed higher as he followed their trail, each step a battle against pain and exhaustion. He had to rest twice, propped against trees, fighting to stay conscious. But each time Sophia's terrified face floated before him, giving him the strength to push on. Around mid-morning, he heard voices ahead, workers at the railroad camp. He dropped into a low crouch, ignoring his protesting ribs, and worked his way closer through the trees. The camp sprawled across a clearing, a dozen tents, a cook wagon, and a larger cabin that probably belonged to the railroad boss. William's experienced eye counted at least 20 men moving about the camp. Most carried revolvers on their hips, and he spotted several rifles stacked outside the main cabin. The odds were impossible, but it didn't matter. Sophia was in there somewhere, and he would find her. He checked his rifle one last time, then began working his way around the camp's perimeter. The deed might be lost, but Sophia's life was worth more than any piece of paper. Whatever it took, he would bring her home. The mountain wind carried the sound of approaching horses. William pressed himself against a pine tree, watching as Deputy Clayton and Sophia's stepfather rode into camp. Between them, tied and gagged, Sophia sat slumped in her saddle. Her face was bruised, and her dress was torn, but her eyes still blazed with defiance. William's hand tightened on his rifle. The pain in his body faded beneath a wave of cold fury. These men had hurt Sophia, had beaten a man of God, had stolen what rightfully belonged to her. They would answer for it, to him and to the Lord. He watched as they dismounted and roughly pulled Sophia from her horse. She stumbled, and her stepfather yanked her upright by her hair. The sight made William's trigger finger itch, but he forced himself to wait. One wrong move now would get them both killed. They dragged Sophia toward the main cabin, where a well-dressed man, probably the railroad boss, waited on the porch. William could see the deed being passed over, could see the satisfied smirk on the boss's face as he examined it. "Take her inside," the boss ordered. "We'll decide what to do with her after I've verified these water rights." As they pushed Sophia through the cabin door, she managed to spit out her gag. Her voice rang across the clearing. "William will come for me. You'll see." The men laughed, but William's heart swelled at her unbroken spirit. Yes, he would come for her. And God help any man who stood in his way. He settled into position behind a fallen log, sighting down his rifle at the cabin door. His injuries throbbed in time with his heartbeat, but his hands were steady. He would wait and watch, and when the moment came, Sophia's words echoed in his mind. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." "I'm here, Sophia," he whispered into the bitter mountain air. "I'm here." William's hands shook as he cleaned Reverend Carter's wounds with water from the church pump. The cold made his own injuries throb, but he pushed the pain aside. The preacher's face was pale. His breathing labored. "These cuts need stitching," William said, dabbing at a deep gash above the Reverend's eye. "I can fetch Doc Miller." "No time," Reverend Carter wheezed. "Sophia needs you more. I'll manage." William tore strips from his own shirt to bind the worst cuts. "At least let me get you mounted proper before I go." His voice was gentle but firm as he helped the older man to his feet. The church stable smelled of hay and leather. William's own horse was still at the livery, but the Reverend's bay mare stood quietly in her stall. His shoulder protested as he lifted the saddle, but he gritted his teeth and secured it anyway. "The Lord will guide your path," Reverend Carter said as William helped him into the saddle. "But promise me you won't seek vengeance alone." William adjusted the stirrups, considering his words carefully. "I know a man who might help. Henry Running Bear. He used to scout for the army. Lives near the reservation now." The Reverend nodded. "I know him. A good man, with wisdom to match his tracking skills. He's 3 hours' ride east if the snow holds off." William checked the cinch one final time. "You sure you can make it to the doctor's?" "The Lord will see me there," Reverend Carter managed a weak smile. "Now go. Find Sophia." William stepped back as the Reverend nudged his horse forward. The morning sun cast long shadows across the churned snow of the churchyard. He watched until the mare and rider disappeared around the corner, then turned toward the stable where his mule waited. The sturdy brown mule, Joshua, stamped impatiently as William approached. Unlike his horse at the livery, Joshua knew these mountain trails as well as William did. The mule's sure-footedness would serve better in the deep snow anyway. William's hands moved automatically through the familiar routine of saddling, though each lift and pull sent fresh pain through his injured shoulder. He retrieved his rifle from where he'd propped it against the wall, checking the action again before sliding it into the scabbard. In the quiet of the stable, William's fear for Sophia threatened to overwhelm him. He leaned his forehead against Joshua's warm neck, closing his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "give me strength for what's ahead. Guide my path to Sophia and keep her safe until I find her. And Lord," his voice caught, "help me remember that vengeance belongs to you alone." Joshua's ears flicked back at the sound of William's voice. The mule stood patient and steady as William pulled himself into the saddle, biting back a groan as his ribs protested. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they emerged from the stable. William turned Joshua's head east, toward the distant shapes of the reservation boundary mountains. Fresh snow had begun falling, but the mule's pace was sure and steady as they left the settlement behind. The miles passed in a blur of white-draped pines and aching silence. William's body screamed for rest, but he pressed on. Every so often he caught himself muttering prayers under his breath, for Sophia's safety, for guidance, for the strength to keep moving despite his injuries. By late afternoon, the reservation boundary mountains loomed closer. William recognized the creek where Henry often fished and the distinctive lightning-struck pine that marked the turn toward his friend's lodge. The snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and still. Henry's lodge stood in a sheltered hollow, smoke rising steady from the central hole. William's throat tightened at the sight. He hadn't visited his friend in months, too wrapped up in his own solitude. Now he came seeking help, and shame mingled with his desperation. Before he could call out, the lodge's hide door opened. Henry emerged, straight-backed despite his 50-plus years. His dark eyes took in William's battered state at a glance. "Brother," Henry said, striding forward to help William dismount. "You bring trouble with you." William's legs nearly buckled as he slid from the saddle. Henry's strong grip steadied him. "I'm sorry to come like this." "No." Henry's voice was firm. "Never apologize for seeking help from family." The word family brought unexpected tears to William's eyes. Henry pretended not to notice, leading both William and Joshua toward the lodge. Inside, the fire's warmth made William's frozen face sting. Henry's wife, Sarah, looked up from her weaving, concern crossing her weathered features. Without a word, she rose to fetch water and healing supplies. Henry helped William sit near the fire, then took Joshua to the small stable behind the lodge. When he returned, Sarah had already begun cleaning William's wounds. "Tell me," Henry said, settling cross-legged across the fire. William's story spilled out in halting phrases, finding Sophia at his cabin, the growing bond between them, the discovery of the deed, and finally the violent attack at the church. His voice broke when he described Sophia being dragged away. Henry listened without interruption, his expression grave. When William finished, Sarah pressed a cup of bitter-smelling tea into his hands. "Drink," she ordered. "It will help with the pain." William sipped obediently, warmth spreading through his chest. Henry remained silent, staring into the fire. Finally, he spoke. "The railroad men have a camp near Eagle Creek. 2 days' ride from here." His eyes met William's. "But if you go in shooting, you will die. And the girl with you." "I know." William set the empty cup aside. "That's why I came to you. I need help, but not just tracking. I need—" He struggled to find the words. "Wisdom," Henry finished. "The patience to find justice without slaughter." "Yes." William's shoulders slumped. "I want to kill them all for hurting her. But that's not what she needs from me." Henry nodded slowly. "Good. You begin to understand." He rose and moved to a chest in the corner, withdrawing something wrapped in soft hide. "I have watched you grow from angry boy to thoughtful man. Now you must grow again, from lone wolf to protective mate." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a worn army spyglass. "We will track them, yes. But first we plan. First we think like the fox, not the bear." William accepted the spyglass with trembling hands. "Thank you, brother." Henry clasped his shoulder, the uninjured one. "Rest now. Sarah will tend your wounds properly. Tomorrow, we begin." William wanted to argue, to insist they leave immediately, but his body's exhaustion betrayed him. The tea's warmth spread through his limbs, making his eyelids heavy. Sarah spread a buffalo robe near the fire. As William lay down, Henry's voice followed him toward sleep. "The Creator's justice moves like water, patient, persistent, wearing away stone. Trust in his timing, brother." William's last conscious thought was of Sophia's face, her eyes bright with defiance even in captivity. "Hold on," he prayed silently. "I'm coming. But I'm coming wise, not angry. I'm coming to bring you home." The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow began falling again, blanketing the world in silence. In Henry's lodge, William slept, his body healing, his spirit strengthening for the task ahead. Tomorrow would bring planning and tracking and the long path toward justice. But for now, surrounded by the warmth of friendship and faith, he rested in the knowledge that he no longer fought alone. The sky lightened from black to pale gray as William and Henry prepared to leave. Sarah pressed a bundle of dried meat and corn cakes into William's hands, her weathered face creased with concern. The morning air bit sharp and cold, making William's injured ribs ache with each breath. Henry studied the ground near his lodge, where fresh snow had fallen during the night. 3 sets of tracks passed here before dawn, he said, crouching to examine the impressions. 2 riders. 1 led horse. Moving fast toward town. William's heart quickened. Could it be them? Perhaps. Henry straightened, adjusting the rifle across his back. Or perhaps others with urgent business. We will know soon enough. They mounted their animals, Henry on his painted mare, William on steady Joshua. The mules' ears swiveled forward as they set out, following the eastern trail. Fresh snow crunched beneath hooves and their breath clouded in the frigid air. Henry led the way, his keen eyes reading signs William would have missed. Here and there he pointed out details: a broken branch, a scuffed patch of bark where a horse had shouldered past a tree, scattered corn kernels where someone had paused to feed their mount. They're not trying to hide their trail, Henry observed after an hour of riding. They feel safe, protected by the law that serves them. William's hands tightened on Joshua's reins. The law serves money here, not justice. Henry nodded. But remember, even corrupt law can be turned against itself if we are patient, like using a river's own force to turn a mill wheel. They rode in silence for a time, the sun climbing higher behind thick clouds. William's thoughts turned to Sophia, remembering how she had looked teaching herself to write by lamplight, her face intent with concentration. The memory of her determination gave him strength even as shame crept back into his heart. Near midday, they stopped to rest the animals in a sheltered grove. William leaned against a pine trunk, watching Henry build a small fire for coffee. The words he had been holding back all morning finally spilled out. I failed her, he said quietly. I should have been stronger. Should have seen them coming. Should have ... Should have seen through walls? Henry interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. Should have fought 5 armed men alone? I don't know. William stared at his hands. I just know I wasn't enough. I've never been enough. He swallowed hard. Henry, I've never even known a woman's love. 35 years old and I'm still... He couldn't finish. Henry was silent for a long moment, watching the coffee begin to bubble. Finally, he spoke. When I was young, before I found Sarah, I knew many women. His voice held no pride in the admission. I thought it made me a man, but I was wrong. He poured coffee into their tin cups. True manhood is not counted in conquest, brother. It is measured in faithfulness, in keeping your word and protecting those who trust you. William wrapped his cold fingers around the warm cup. But how can I protect her? I'm just a mountain man who can barely talk to people. She deserves better. She deserves someone who sees her worth, Henry countered. Someone who respects her spirit and guards her dignity. I have watched you with her. You do these things naturally, without thinking. He sipped his coffee. That is worth more than smooth words or past experience. They finished their coffee in thoughtful silence. As they prepared to mount up again, Henry added, The Creator does not make mistakes, William. He put you in her path for a reason. The afternoon wore on as they followed the tracks toward town. The weather held clear but cold, and William's body ached with each step of his mule. Yet his spirit felt lighter, Henry's words working on his heart like spring sun on frozen ground. As dusk approached, they made camp beneath towering pines. Henry insisted on this spot, away from the main trail. Better to rest now. Approach town fresh tomorrow, he explained. Night brings clear thoughts if we listen well. They shared a simple meal of Sarah's provisions. Then Henry told stories of his people's winter dances, of how the drums would echo off snowy peaks. William listened, grateful for the distraction from his worries. But as the fire burned low and Henry settled into his blankets, sleep eluded William. He rose quietly and walked a short distance from camp. The night sky spread vast and clear above the pines, stars sharp as ice crystals. William sank to his knees in the snow, not feeling the cold through his wool pants. "Lord," he whispered, his breath visible in the starlight, "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I've spent so many years alone thinking that's what you wanted for me, thinking my shame was your judgment." Tears froze on his cheeks as he continued. "But Sophia, she makes me want to be better, to be worthy of her trust. Please, Lord, make me strong enough to protect her, not with violence, but with mercy. Show me how to be the man she needs, the man you created me to be." The only answer was the soft whisper of wind through pine boughs. Yet, as William knelt there, something shifted in his heart. The shame that had weighed him down for so many years began to crack like river ice in spring. He remembered Sophia's face when he first taught her to write her name. How she had looked at him not with judgment for his awkward shyness, but with gratitude for his patience. How her eyes held no mockery when he stumbled over words, only appreciation for his gentle spirit. "You were right, Lord," he murmured. "I was measuring myself by the world's standards, not yours. My worth isn't in what I lack, but in what you've given me, a faithful heart, steady hands, and the courage to love purely." When William finally returned to the camp, Henry was awake, adding wood to the fire. The older man said nothing, but his eyes held understanding. William settled onto his bedroll, feeling peace steal over him despite tomorrow's uncertainty. "Henry," he said softly. Thank you for helping me see clearer." Henry's smile was visible in the firelight. "The Creator's truth was already in your heart, brother. You just needed someone to brush away the dust." He lay back, pulling his blanket close. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we fight with wisdom, not shame." William closed his eyes, Sophia's face clear in his mind. This time, instead of feeling unworthy of her smile, he felt strengthened by it. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them not as a broken man, but as one made whole by faith and purpose. The fire crackled softly. Above the pines, stars wheeled in their ancient dance, witnesses to one man's transformation from shame to grace. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, William rested in newfound peace, finally understanding that his worth had never depended on what he lacked, but on the faithful heart God had given him all along. The winter dawn painted the sky in pale shades of rose and pearl. William and Henry sat their mounts on a ridge overlooking the town, watching smoke rise from chimneys into the still morning air. Fresh snow from the night before blanketed the streets, untouched except for a few early tracks leading to the livery stable. "Deputy's office," Henry murmured, pointing to a 2-story building with bars on its ground floor windows. A lamp burned inside despite the growing daylight. 2 men on guard outside. More inside, I expect. William squinted through the dim light. His heart clenched when he spotted movement behind those barred windows, a familiar silhouette pacing back and forth. Sophia. She was alive, at least, though the sight of her caged like an animal made his blood run hot. "Easy, brother," Henry cautioned, reading William's tension. "Remember what we discussed. Violence brings only more violence." "I remember." William took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "We do this proper, in the light of day." They guided their animals down a back trail into town, keeping to the shadows of buildings. The streets were beginning to stir as they tied their mounts behind the church. Through a window, they could see Reverend Carter inside, tending the stove despite his injuries from the attack. The sight of the preacher's bruised face strengthened William's resolve. Henry touched William's arm. "Look there." A group of well-dressed men were gathering at the hotel, railroad executives by their fine coats and city boots. They carried leather portfolios and spoke in loud, confident voices about property lines and water rights. "Noon," one man announced to the others. "We'll meet at the deputy's office to finalize everything." William's jaw tightened. They had until midday to act. Henry led the way to the church's side door, where they found Reverend Carter waiting for them. "Thank the Lord," the preacher said softly, embracing them both. Despite his battered face, his eyes were clear and determined. "I've been praying you'd return." "We need your help, Reverend," William said. "And the help of anyone else who's tired of being pushed around by railroad money." The preacher nodded. "Many are afraid to speak out, but they're angry." The deputies turned his badge into a tool for the highest bidder. He gestured to the pews. "Tell me what you need." For the next hour, they planned while the Reverend sent his young son to quietly spread word to trusted townspeople. William paced as he waited, watching through the windows as more railroad men arrived. He saw Sophia's stepfather swagger down the street, already celebrating his expected windfall. By mid-morning, the church began filling with familiar faces. Ranchers who'd lost grazing rights, merchants squeezed by railroad prices, families who'd seen their wells run dry when the company diverted streams. They spoke in whispers, but William saw the same fire in their eyes that he felt in his heart. Henry addressed them first, his quiet dignity commanding attention. "This is not just about one girl or one deed," he told them. "This is about whether justice can be bought and sold like cattle. About whether a badge means protecting the people or protecting profits." William stepped forward then, forcing himself to meet their eyes despite his natural shyness. His voice came out stronger than he expected. "Sophia has legal right to that land and water. Her mother made sure of that before she died. The railroad men know it, that's why they're trying to steal it through force instead of law." "But what can we do?" asked Tom Wilson, a weathered rancher. "They've got guns and badges." "They have weapons," Henry agreed. "But we have truth. And truth spoken by many voices is harder to silence than one man with a gun." William squared his shoulders. "We're going to confront them in broad daylight, with witnesses. Every one of you who's been wronged by their greed, your presence matters. Your voice matters." Reverend Carter stepped up beside them, his bruised face a testament to what they faced. "The good book says, 'Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist.' That's what we aim to do today. Stand firm in truth." More townspeople arrived as the morning wore on. William was moved to see even those who'd once viewed him as just a strange mountain man, now standing with him. They shared stories of railroad bullying, of water rights stolen, of threats made by the deputy against anyone who complained. At 11:30, Henry gathered them close. "We move now, before they expect it. Remember, no weapons. We fight with truth today." William led them out of the church, his heart pounding but his step steady. Nearly 30 townspeople followed, walking 2 by 2 down the snowy street toward the deputy's office. Windows opened as they passed. More people emerged from shops and homes, joining the procession. The guards outside the deputy's office straightened in alarm, hands moving to their guns. But Henry's calm voice carried clearly, "We come unarmed, to witness justice." The deputy burst out, his face red with anger. "What's this foolishness? Clear these streets." "We're here for Sophia," William said, his voice ringing across the sudden silence. "And for her rightful property." "That girl's a runaway," Sophia's stepfather snarled, pushing through the crowd. "And that deed belongs to me." "No." William pulled out a folded paper, a copy of county records Henry had helped him obtain. The deed was registered in her mother's name with Sophia as inheritor. You have no claim to it. The railroad men were emerging from the hotel now, looking uncertain at the size of the crowd. William raised his voice so all could hear. "These men want Sophia's water rights. They tried to buy them from her stepfather, who has no authority to sell. When that failed, they turned to force, beating a preacher of God, kidnapping an innocent girl, stealing legal documents." "Lies!" the deputy shouted, but his voice wavered as townspeople began calling out their own stories of his corruption. "You threatened my family when I wouldn't sell. You poisoned my cattle when I complained. You burned my fence when I refused their offer." The crowd pressed closer, their voices growing stronger with each shared grievance. The deputy's men looked increasingly uncertain, outnumbered by peaceful but determined faces. William stepped forward, fixing the deputy with a steady gaze. "Open that door. Let Sophia go. Return her deed. Do it now, in front of all these witnesses, or every person here will sign complaints to the territorial governor about your crimes." The deputy's hand twitched toward his gun, but Henry's quiet voice cut through the tension. "Think carefully, friend. Violence here will only prove their stories true." For a long moment, no one moved. William held his breath, praying his gamble would work. Then one of the railroad men stepped forward, straightening his vest. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should review this situation. If there are questions about the deed's legitimacy, there are no questions." Sophia's stepfather raged, but the railroad man silenced him with a sharp gesture. "We cannot afford a scandal," he said firmly, "not with the governor already investigating complaints from other territories. He really tweet purity. Release the girl. Return her property. The company will pursue other options." The deputy's face twisted in fury, but he knew he was beaten. He barked an order, and moments later, the office door opened. Sophia emerged, pale but unharmed. Her eyes found William's instantly. Without caring who watched, William strode forward and gathered her into his arms. The crowd's murmur turned warm, approving. Someone began to clap, and others joined in. "The deed," William said firmly, still holding Sophia. The deputy yanked it from his desk and thrust it at them. Sophia took it with trembling hands, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clutched her mother's legacy. "It's over," Henry said quietly, joining them. "The truth has found its day." But William knew it wasn't quite finished. Still holding Sophia close, he turned to address the crowd. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for standing with us, for choosing right over easy, for proving that justice still means something in this town." Reverend Carter stepped forward, his bruised face peaceful. "Let us pray together," he suggested, "and give thanks for courage shown and mercy given." As heads bowed in the snowy street, William felt Sophia's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, marveling at how love had led him from solitude to this moment, surrounded by community, strong in truth, blessed beyond measure. The morning sun broke through the clouds, gleaming on snow and upturned faces. A new day had dawned in more ways than one. The noon sun cast harsh shadows across the main street as William stepped forward, Henry's steady presence beside him. Townsfolk gathered in doorways and along the wooden sidewalks, their faces tense with anticipation. William's voice carried clear and strong across the hushed street. "Let all here witness what's been done," he called out. "These men have stolen what isn't theirs." The deputy emerged from his office, shoving Sophia ahead of him. Her hands were bound, but her chin was lifted high. Her stepfather lurked behind them, his face twisted with spite. "Release her," William demanded. "Return what you stole." The deputy's hand dropped to his gun. The metallic click of the hammer being drawn back echoed in the winter air. "Back off, mountain man." William kept his own hands open, palms up. "No. I won't trade violence for violence. The truth is my weapon today." Reverend Carter pushed through the crowd, his face mottled with bruises. "I can testify to the deed's true ownership," he declared. "I saw the original registration myself." "Ungrateful little witch," Sophia's stepfather spat. "After all I done for you?" But murmurs of support for William rippled through the gathering crowd. The townspeople were choosing sides, and they weren't standing with the men who'd terrorized them for so long. The judge arrived by horseback as shadows lengthened across the street. For 3 long hours, he heard testimony in the town hall. Sophia spoke of her mother's careful planning. Reverend Carter, despite his injuries, detailed the deed's authenticity. William's quiet strength never wavered as he recounted finding Sophia that snowy night. "By the power vested in me," the judge finally declared, "I find this deed legitimate and binding. The water rights belong to Sophia." The deputy's face twisted as the judge stripped away his badge. Sophia's stepfather stormed out, muttering dark threats. But the townspeople's unified stance made it clear. He was no longer welcome. As Sophia fell into William's arms, tears of relief streaming down her face, the railroad men quietly rolled up their maps and departed. That evening, lantern light warmed the little church's windows. Inside, townsfolk packed the pews, their voices raised in joyful song. Reverend Carter, though moving carefully, preached with passion about God's justice working through willing hearts. "Today, we witnessed mercy triumph over greed," he said, nodding to William. "One man's courage protected the innocent." William and Sophia sat close together in the front pew, their voices joining the familiar hymns. Her hand found his as they sang, their hearts overflowing with gratitude for deliverance and belonging. Winter's grip returned to the mountains, painting the forest in crystalline white. William and Sophia made their way home from town, the sled runners cutting smooth tracks through fresh snow. Sophia sat bundled in thick blankets beside William, her cheeks rosy from the cold but her eyes bright with contentment. The journey stretched longer than usual, as William carefully guided his mule around drifts and ice. Sophia leaned against his shoulder, humming hymns they had sung in church. By late afternoon, smoke curled from their cabin's chimney. Home, at last. Inside, William built up the hearth while Sophia unpacked their supplies. The familiar walls seemed different now, warmer somehow. They worked together, preparing supper, moving in comfortable harmony as beans simmered and cornbread baked. Over steaming bowls, William cleared his throat. "Sophia, do you truly want to stay here? With me?" Tears welled in her dark eyes. "I want more than just to stay," she whispered. "I want to be your wife, William Boone." His heart swelled as he reached across the table to take her hand. "I reckon that's what I've been praying for." In the firelight's gentle glow, William drew Sophia close. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a promise of the life they would build together. Spring's first warmth touched the Colorado mountains, melting snow into trickling streams. The small wooden church glowed in morning sunlight as townsfolk filed inside, dressed in their Sunday best. Fresh wildflowers adorned the rough-hewn pews, their sweet fragrance mixing with pine from newly swept floors. The churchwomen had worked for days on Sophia's dress, crafting something beautiful from simple cotton and lace. She stood now in the back room, smoothing the fabric with trembling hands while kind-faced ladies fussed over her hair and veil. At the altar, William shifted from boot to boot, his clean-pressed suit feeling strange after months of buckskins. Reverend Carter, his bruises now faded to yellow, offered a steadying hand on William's shoulder. Henry stood nearby as witness, his dark eyes bright with joy for his friend. The small congregation rose as Sophia appeared in the doorway. William's breath caught in his throat. She walked slowly down the aisle, carrying a bouquet of early spring flowers. Her steps were sure, her smile radiant beneath her veil. The same worn Bible she had learned to read from rested in her other hand. Reverend Carter's voice filled the chapel with warmth as he spoke of God's love and mercy. William and Sophia exchanged simple gold bands, their voices clear and strong as they made their vows before God and community. When William lifted Sophia's veil, tears sparkled in both their eyes. After the ceremony, they knelt together at the altar. William's deep voice joined Sophia's gentle one in prayer, thanking God for bringing them together and asking blessing on their new family. The congregation bowed their heads in shared reverence. Sunlight streamed through the windows as William and Sophia stepped out of the church hand in hand. Rice scattered around them like spring rain while the townsfolk cheered. Henry embraced them both, whispering traditional blessings in his native tongue. Reverend Carter beamed from the doorway, watching his flock celebrate this testament to God's redemptive love. Together, William and Sophia walked into the bright morning. Behind them lay months of hardship and fear. Before them stretched a future filled with promise, their love sanctified by faith and strengthened by trials overcome. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.